Is writing your full-time job, or how do you decide? Did you decide to become an author? Did you study writing?
No, I never studied writing, and I never thought of myself as a writer, although as a political person I had done some writing. I had, as a minister I had written sermons, and as a political organizer I had written news releases and, essays or pamphlets and brochures and stuff. So, I felt I could write, but I had never written fiction. And then one day, somebody in New York who knew I was in Vermont called me up and said, "Can you send me a high-powered rifle with a telescopic sight? Because you can get it in Vermont and I can't get it here." And I said, "Yeah, what do you want that for?" And he says, "Oh, I want to kill black people out of my window." And why do you want to kill black people? Well, because there's going to be a war between the blacks and the Jews, and I want to take some with me, Jewish guy. I want to take some with me, and any cops that would try to stop me. So I told him no. He cursed me out. We haven't talked since. But that conversation was so provocative that I wrote it down. I didn't know why. I just wrote it down. And, as you start writing, you start thinking, well, what else would this guy say about other things? And I remember having a conversation with him in New York, in my New York days, and he was very misogynistic. And he just couldn't deal with women and put them down. And so I just started making a character that contained not only things that he had said in this phone call and that I remembered him saying, but just where would it go? And that became my first novel. I didn't know if it was a novel. I was just writing it down, and then when it got to be 100 pages, I said, 100 pages? I've never written anything this long. This must be a novel, and that was this novel, Golem Song, which was not the first novel that was brought out. It was the second novel. And it's about a guy who essentially, I realized later, and not when I was writing the book, thinks that he's a golem. Golem was a mythical figure in Jewish myth of a clay kind of monster, Frankenstein monster, who was built by a rabbi in Prague to protect the Jewish community in Prague against pogroms. And there were consequences of building that figure in the myths. And so I wrote a book, realized at the end, almost the book was entirely finished, that this was about a golem. And then I reoriented the book to be about golemism, and golem sort of seeded that idea back in. So this was actually the first book, and it was stimulated by this grotesque experience.
How long ago was that not called?
That was in '96, and I remember 96. That because in '96, Carl Rowan, who was a syndicated black columnist, wrote a book called The Coming Race War. Right? And so, the guy wasn't entirely wrong about there's going to be a war between the blacks and the Jews. That's what Carl Rowan's book was about. He had a slightly different approach.
But we didn't. Now we have a black president, so.
Well, yes.
There's not going to be any race war.
Yes, there is. But, we can talk about Obama if you want, but let's not go there at the moment. So anyway, that's how I started writing. I was writing this book, and I thought, well, geez, I need an agent, or I need a publisher, one or the other. So I started writing letters and describing this book, and then it had gone on for so long without any answers that I was already working on Insect Dreams. And so in my later query stages, I began to mention, also I'm working on a book about Kafka's guy who turned into a cockroach. And that was what stimulated interest in the literary community, because there was this huge figure that they already knew about, very important story. And so I got an agent to write me back. She wasn't interested in Golem Song, but she'd like to know more about this. So we started writing about that. She took me on. She found me a publisher who is still my publisher, who's published 7 of my books. And the one that he was starting with was, this is the book she sold that got me started. And so Insect Dreams it was my first published novel, but not my first book. And, you know, once you're published, then all of a sudden things both become easier and harder. They're easier because you have a publication and, you know, people write about you and you have reviews and all of that. They're harder because all of a sudden you think, geez, I have a responsibility now. I mean, I'm a writer. I guess I'm a writer. They say I'm a writer. I get reviewed.
There were 7 books published. Why,
Well, by now, but yeah. I mean, so what I'm writing, that I better write something that I'm writing this for a person. Someone's going to read this. You know, I'm not just writing it, having fun. Someone's going to read this, and that's another kind of responsibility. Someone's going to read this. Is not as lovely as it seems. That is, it's lovely, but it brings with it other levels of responsibility.
So you were already 57 years old when you started writing.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's pretty late in life to...
No kidding. Even I could do it. Yeah, I'm not sure how much longer you can do that. I mean, for one thing, many people own computers now, so many people are writing their first novels, more than the market can bear, and without any sort of control about the level of the work. So there's a hugely overextended demand on publishers and agents at the same time that that reading, as we were talking about before, as a skill is kind of, if not collapsing, at least deteriorating. So for books like these, which are complex, and there's a lot of wordplay, and there's a lot of reference to things, and it just gets harder and harder to do what I did 10 years ago. And for me, it was harder to do what I did 10 years ago than it was in the old days, like the 50s, you know, the Saul Bellow days, the beginning Philip Roth days, the days when Knopf was at Knopf and Norton was at Norton and Bennett Cerf was at Random House, when they were all into developing American literature, and that's why they were there, and that's what they used their companies for. Well, that's not now. They've all been replaced by MBAs, and the MBAs want to make money. So, again, it's way harder for somebody who is trying to write literature to have their books looked at seriously by companies that are looking for the next blockbuster.